So it's about 9 a.m. on Monday, February 28th, 2022. As you can see, that's the VIP club of the Premier Palace Hotel. I'm walking down to Krishatik, and I'm going to the supermarket to get some food. They've announced that it's okay to go to supermarkets and pharmacies. The problem that we're having is that because of the weapons that the Zelensky regime handed out willy-nilly in the last few days, a lot of criminals have these military-grade weapons, quite frankly. And so there's been robberies, there's been looting, there's been rapes, there's been all kinds of havoc because of these criminals. And it's known for a fact that these a lot of the shooting that went on last night in Kiev had nothing to do with the Russians. The Russians were 10 kilometers or more away from these shootings, so it was clearly probably gang-related, gangs settling scores and shooting one another.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we're in the village of Nikolaevka, and you can see behind me a group of soldiers who are preparing to go into battle. We're told that these are people from the mobilization of the Donetsk People's Republic from the complete draft and mobilization that was declared just before this intensification of this war started. And we're here to document the situation and show exactly what has happened and is happening. This village, Nikolaevka, just days ago was taken control of by the Donetsk People's Republic in conjunction with the Russian forces. It's unclear really where the line ends and starts as far as that goes, but we're here to show you everything on the ground. There are still civilians here. This is actually our second report from this location, or from this village, not this location, but we can hear active fighting going on here. So we're going to continue to show you everything on the ground here.
Something's going on.
Where this day is going to end up, where we're going to go, but
something's happening.
We're here showing you the real situation.
Exactly what it is, we don't know. He's talking about the DPR there, the Donetsk People's Republic, which is a self-proclaimed breakaway state located in Ukraine, which was formed in April of 2014. Its capital city, its largest city in the area, is Donetsk. Denis Pushilin has served as its head of state since 2018. Ukraine regards both this area, which has proclaimed itself to be independent. Ukraine regards both the DPR and the Luhansk People's Republic, the LPR, as terrorist organizations. Ukraine considers them to be part of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine as a result of Russian military intervention, together with the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. On February the 21st of this year, a few days ago, Russia officially recognized the DPR, this area, where we see here, and the LPR as independent states, becoming the first United Nations member state to do so. Russia had formally already recognized things like identities, licenses, diplomas, and birth certificates and marriage licenses from people in the area, and things like vehicle registration plates that were issued by the DPR. Russia had recognized them as official documents as of February 2017. Both republics are at the center of what we see happening right now, the 2021-2022 Russo-Ukrainian crisis/war, and the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that's where Patrick Lancaster is his name. That's where he's reporting from here. You can find his stuff on YouTube and BitChute and see what you think. I'm not, making any claims about what he's up to there, but he seems to be reporting from a pro-Russian perspective, and he's in these areas. Now, these people are defending their areas. They're defending these weren't Ukrainians defending themselves. These are Ukrainians. These are people who see themselves as independent, as citizens of an independent state that's not part of Ukraine. Problem is, the rest of the world doesn't recognize that. And so that's where we're going to start today, with these ideas in our heads, what the media has been saying for the past week, what's actually going on here. So we want to help you. The first clip you saw was the man in the red hat from downtown Ukraine. It's been verified. The guy is in Kiev or Kyiv, however you choose to say it. He's there and hasn't seen a lot going on yet. But that is because, we'll show you a map here in just a minute to let you know where everything's happening. There's not much happening in Kiev right now because that's not where Putin is. That's not where he is focused. What you're hearing in the media, well, you're not hearing anything that has to do with reality in the media. And oh my, how things have changed in such a short time. Where did the coronavirus go? Does anyone remember the Canadian truckers? All the lockdown protests in Europe, Australia. Are you beginning to catch on to how things work in the new world? Narrative control is the way of the future, and the future is now. The stories move so fast that by the time you've gassed up your big rig and you're heading down to the protest, World War III has broken out. Just in time for the elites to declare victory over the virus and hand you your freedoms back. Tonight, in the United States, President Joe Biden will give a State of the Union address. Let's go ahead and predict his speech. It'll happen here in a couple hours, 2.5 hours or so. Let's predict it. First of all, they're going to say we've defeated the virus. Joe Biden tonight will claim victory over the pandemic, and he'll say we can all go back to normal. You got to be careful, though. Right. He'll say we've conquered the pandemic, and you can have some of your freedoms back now. Hooray! And everyone on both, it'll be a bipartisan event. People on both sides will stand up and cheer. They'll also tell us, they'll say, finally, we're happy to declare that we have frozen Vladimir Putin's bank accounts to save the world from nuclear annihilation. Hooray! And both sides will stand up. Bipartisan support will stand up and applaud. What are we watching? They'll tell us also that we have to prepare for the next pandemic that we know is coming. How do they know this? Well, they have prophets like Bill Gates working for them. When Bill Gates says you need to get bullish on vaccine stocks, you call your broker. Now, before we get started here today, let me show you this map, this Ukrainian map, or this map of the region in just a bit. But first of all, let's talk a little bit more about what we've experienced here recently in the United States. In the world, right? In the world. Recently, Summer and myself visited a fast food establishment earlier this week, and we noticed that they're no longer required to wear masks behind the counter or in the kitchen. Now, I was a little encouraged when I saw this, so I asked the young lady behind the counter, when was the policy lifted? When were you allowed to take your masks off back there? So the enthusiastic teenager said, they told us last week we didn't have to wear them anymore. And I asked her if she was happy about that. She said, oh yes. So tired of wearing them. So you can see this happening. Now I don't know where you live, but you may live in an area where they're still being strict about it. But pretty much, even in the most blue of states, these mandates are lifting, and we're going to tell you exactly why. We found the science. We finally found the science that they've been following. But I found the timing of this development interesting, mainly because I live in a state with a Democratic governor. And recently, Democrat governors all over America were advised to back off on COVID restrictions. A Democratic polling firm called Impact Research recently advised Democrats, quote, to recognize that people are worn out and feeling real harm from the years-long restrictions, and they advised the Democrats to, now it's time to take their side. Impact Research, here they are. Impact Research is a polling firm. Brand management is what they are. They're the Biden administration's, one of the Biden administration's polling firms. They have advised leaders all over America, Democrats, of course, to back off the mandates and restrictions if you want to stay in office, because midterm elections are coming up fast. And that's why they're going to claim victory tonight over the pandemic. Now, if we go on this website here, we go to our work and we go down to their services, we can see that they deal with message development. At Impact Research, we have developed coordinated messaging campaigns for some of the most consequential names in politics and business. We make impact by going beyond just the top-rated message, using the industry's most innovative techniques to look for messaging that actually moves people. We also understand that messaging recommendations are only as useful as your campaign's ability to successfully implement them. We take pride in the fact that we see ourselves as message watchdogs. What do we call that here? Narrative control. For every communication your campaign has with its target audience, we make certain that your campaign is staying on message. And of course, brand management. Is that a little too small for you? Brand management, folks. This is what they deal in. This is how governance is done today. Brand management. Where's the truth? Doesn't matter what the truth. Narrative is truth now. The decades of experience our team at Impact Research has in the chaotic world of politics makes us perfectly suited to help you grow your business's brand or your political party's brand. Our corporate clients have in common a need to think strategically about how they position themselves, understand their target audiences, and generate positive press. In partnering with some of the world's most successful corporations from around the globe, we know what works and what doesn't work with consumers or citizens or your target audience. We make an impact by providing strategic counsel that has enabled the best in the business to flourish in even the most competitive of environments. Earlier this week, this group, February the 24th, about 5 days ago, is that what that is? Put out this document. Well, they released this document to interested parties. This went around to, clearly it went around to Democrat governors all over the United States. It went surely to the Biden administration as well. And Julie Hamill from Hamill Law tweeted this out. She shared this. She thought, look at this. Just, obviously you can't see that, but make it a little bit bigger here for you so you can see. So you can see what we're going to, after 2 years that necessitated lockdowns, travel bans, school closures, mask mandates, and nearly 1 million deaths, nearly every American finally has the tools to protect themselves from this virus. It's time for Democrats to take credit for ending the COVID crisis phase of the COVID war. It's time to point to important victories like vaccine distribution and providing economic stability to Americans. That's bold. And fully enter the rebuilding phase that comes after any war. Pay close attention tonight to Joe Biden's State of the Union speech. Listen to him claim victory over the COVID crisis. Why? Well, now you know. Impact Research, a Democratic polling firm, published a memo on the 24th, as you see there, calling on Democrats to declare the crisis phase of COVID over and push for feeling and acting normal. Now, some of the results from this are, they say in their report here, twice as many voters are now more concerned about COVID's effect on the economy, 49%, than about someone in their family or someone they know actually becoming infected with it, 24%. The memo reads, 6 in 10 Americans describe themselves as worn out by the pandemic. The more we talk about the threat of COVID and onerously restrict people's lives because of it, the more we turn them against us and show them we're out of touch with their daily realities. Aren't you happy? Let me get this one back up here. See, this is the science we've been following. This is what it sounds like behind the scenes, my friends. That is where all this science has been coming from for 2 years. From polling firms and think tanks who take the temperature of society and determine what they think people are willing to go along with. Or how to compel people to go along with something they normally would not go along with. This is how decisions are made in a technocracy. Polling experts and marketing brand managers tell the elites what they think the people will or will not endure, according to the stated goals, obviously, of those elites. The science that we've all been following for 2 years is social science. It's not biology, epidemiology, or virology. It's social science for social engineering a nation into a mindset where they will gladly go along with policies that are not in their best interest. The memo urges Democrats to take credit for reaching this new non-crisis phase. Their reason is, quote, after 2 years that necessitated lockdowns and all of the restrictions, they say every American family now has the tools to protect themselves. This is nonsense. There was no need for any of this to start with. We have the same tools today that we had before, unless you consider a reckless worldwide experiment a new tool. It is good, however, to finally know exactly where the science has been coming from all along. Is there any wonder why Americans, people around the world, have lost faith in mainstream news and have lost faith in our own government to tell us the truth? Is it any wonder? It's a new world, and there is a lot at stake. The new narrative, my friends, is war. All that mask mandate, all that lockdown stuff, all that religious exemption stuff, that was all yesterday. It's old news. The same people who fed the country and the world with propaganda for the last 2 years are the same people today telling you that you must hate Vladimir Putin, that you must take our side on this or you're defective. Anybody remember vaccine mandates? Anybody remember religious exemptions? Where'd the masks go? Remember when we cared about who was going to be able to refuse a vaccine? It's all a dim memory now. The world is at war, they say. Some governments around the world are lifting restrictions and mandates, and we must remember this. They still hold the power to bring them back anytime they want to, for any reason that they conjure. There's no reasonable discourse on this issue at the government level. There are only mandates and then two types of people, the obedient and those who are anti-science. Now, it has become a black and white world, a world of black and white thinking, where nuance is not tolerated. Therefore, truth is not tolerated because, as we have been taught from critical theory, narrative is the only truth, the only real truth. Whatever pushes the ball down the field, whatever advances the current agenda. These mandates never had anything to do with science or morality. It was polling all along. Problem, reaction, predetermined solution. However, the decisions of these people in power are affected by what citizens do or don't do. Never forget this. Governments, as we well know, for example, pay attention to trucker convoys and protests. Don't stop the protests. Don't let up on the pressure. Keep supporting Canadian truckers. Keep supporting American truckers. Keep supporting anyone who is reasonably challenging the arbitrary mandates and the creeping communitarianism. Do not let the current situation, the current narrative, the new narrative distract you from what's happening in your own backyard. War has been declared on every person in the world. Freedom is under attack, And now is not the time to get lulled into a new narrative. The government media propaganda axis has its own agenda, which shifts according to new priorities. For now, in America, the message is we're coming out of the dark days. The heaviest restrictions can be lifted. Translation, midterm elections are approaching. Against Biden's horrific poll numbers, Democrats need every edge they can get. So they want to tell us that better days are here. And it might just push people back into their favor. But it's all a public relations calculation. It has nothing to do with science or concern for the welfare of the public. Propaganda is only interested in what we can sell, what we can get away with, what disaster or crime we can hide, what street protest can we appropriate to our own advantage. And now the propagandists have a new idol to trot out. War. Russia. That sweeps all other issues off the table. Destroying economies all around the world, that's old news today. Old narrative. Mission accomplished. Anybody remember Dr. Fauci? Doctor who? That is how fast the narrative moves today, and how short the attention span of the people has become. Shift the focus away from the pandemic and let's focus on war and how we're protecting democracy around the world. Right after we just demolished democracy and liberty for 2 years. Now, John Rappaport writes in one of his recent blogs, he says, the subliminal subtext goes something like this. What's more important right now, refusing a jab in the arm or trying to hide from nuclear missiles that take 10 minutes to reach your house? Which is the bigger criminal today, Bill Gates or Vladimir Putin? What has a greater impact on your mind right now? Some vague Great Reset or an H-bomb destroying the earth? How about this? Which bank freeze is more important? Is freezing the accounts of Vladimir Putin more important, or freezing the accounts of the Canadian truckers who were protesting more important? President Biden is being prepped as never before to deliver a compelling State of the Union speech to the nation tonight. This is going to be a wartime State of the Union. All hands on deck. Bipartisan support is mandatory tonight. America will save the world. That's the message that they're selling. Are you buying it? Propaganda plays on the emotions. It's designed to bypass critical thinking skills and penetrate directly to the emotions. And that's governance in the new world order. And that's what we'll see tonight from Biden. A rip-roaring, old-fashioned wartime pep rally where COVID is declared dead, but be on the lookout for the next one. Because there's always a next one coming in this new world. And the new enemy, public enemy number one, is announced. Just like with the invasions of Iraq, the American people have to be compelled, coerced. You have to get us lathered up to get behind this new narrative. People need to be inspired. And we know that most people today are ready for a new narrative and will happily jump on this bandwagon to leave the stale COVID narrative behind. Playing on fear and traditional ideals of wartime unity. No doubt Biden will say something like, my friends, this is about safety. We must ensure the safety of the people in the region. We're the protectors of the world. We're going to make the world a better place. Our cause is just. Let's all come together now and love the world into safety and into democracy by uniting against our common enemy. If you haven't noticed, Joe Biden has been pitching Vladimir Putin as the enemy of the whole world. I wonder if he asked anyone. Did the polling firm, did Impact Research go around and ask who all thinks Vladimir Putin is the worst threat in the world? Did he poll anyone in Ukraine? even poll anybody in America. How does he know the whole world is against Putin? Folks, this is Saddam Hussein all over again. Of course, he'll leave out the part about U.S. foreign policy pushing Ukraine into its current state, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. I'm going to give you a timeline of how we got into this situation so you can see the full picture. He'll leave this part out, though. How U.S. foreign policy over the past few decades has pushed Ukraine into this current state of disarray, with rebel forces dotting the landscape and real live image bearers of God being pushed, prodded, and treated like commodities now for decades, treated like numbers. That part will be left out because it doesn't contribute to the tight mental stimulation of the current propaganda, the new narrative. They're going to resurrect every old cliche about Russia from the old Cold War days. And they want to present the impression that our struggle is once again against the evil empire. How about our state-run media here in the United States? The View will do the heavy lifting for the stay-at-home moms. They'll take care of the propaganda there. We'll have Scarborough and Stephanopoulos and Don Lemon do the heavy lifting in prime time or in the morning hours. We'll have our celebrities and our athletes chime in regularly with our narrative to get the young folks on board, because it's the new generation that we really need to convince. Of course, anyone who challenges this message or dares to suggest that perhaps Putin isn't actually Hitler must be called out as a Russian agent or a racist, or however they can be shamed into submission. They're going to claim that freedom is their primary objective. They're going to claim that they're fighting for democracy. But if anyone is compelled to believe that line, that the current U.S. government really stands for freedom right now, do not forget that the COVID state of emergency, national lockdowns, aka imprisonment of the American people, showed that freedom was the last thing on their minds. They talk boldly about protecting freedom in Eastern Europe while they do all they can to shave away freedom right here in the United States. They are gravely concerned about a breach of the border in Ukraine while they kick open the doors on our own southern border and allow the free flow of whoever wants to bring whatever into our country. They are destabilizing our own nation while claiming to be fighting to stabilize another one halfway around the world. The Cold War Soviet narrative, my friends, has come home to roost. We have been infiltrated. Yuri Bezmenov put it out there in the 80s, and it came to pass. But the big news here is the narrative they're selling is not coherent. Folks, in the end, lies cannot triumph. What will be said tomorrow after Biden's rah-rah speech tonight? Are we going to forget the extreme abuse of power that we've seen over the past couple of years? What will we do? How will we react to the new narrative? From C.S. Lewis, God in the Dock. He wrote this decades ago. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. Those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, because they do so with the approval of their own conscience. This very kindness stings with intolerable insult. To be cured against one's will and cured of states which we may not regard as disease is to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals, and that is how our government has us classified. But now today, we're going to bring some clarity to the current war taking place in Ukraine and all the propaganda being spread in the mainstream, and of course also in the truth movement circles on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, and all over the internet. My question is this: why is this being presented as a black and white problem? where anyone who sees it as a more complex problem is automatically deemed to be a supporter of Putin. Why is the news presenting this as a distinct paradigm with no nuance? The terms democracy and sovereignty, this is a very important point today. The term democracy is being used in a way it hasn't been used before now. Today in the mainstream media and among politically progressive elites, the word democracy is just another word for globalism. And we're going to show you how that is beyond any doubt today. So to continue the lesson, about how we need to be thinking about where we're headed. Some people say it's communism that they want. Some people it's totalitarianism or it's Marxism. Well, the term for where we're headed is communitarianism, which means balancing your individual rights with the rights of the community. The community is now defined as the global community. And this is going to be pitched to you as the new enlightened form of political discourse. And you are selfish if you insist on individual rights and freedoms. This has become the justification for all kinds of political intrigue around the world, experiments with Marxism right here in the United States, and of course, United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development. For the good of the planet, for everyone's security, for your health, to protect your children, to limit violence, to stop bullying, to protect the rights of those in the future. That's how they sell it. And that's why it works. But these sound like great ideas that anyone could get behind. But, of course, the language, the definitions have all been changed. These words don't mean what they've always meant. Not to the people using them. They seem to always bring about more restrictive mandates, policies, and laws. A kind of cancer that's metastasizing into therapeutic totalitarianism. And that's what C.S. Lewis was describing in that quote there. Therapeutic totalitarianism, where the world government, if they get their way, will be there to hold your hand through all your big decisions, and your small ones too, all for the common good. We're the world government, and we're here to help you. We're here to protect you from bad people who cause racism and climate change, and to deplatform anyone who challenges our message. They create problems out of thin air. And then they claim that they're here to fix them, with the solution already devised ahead of time. Hegelian dialectic has been deployed as a tactical weapon of social change. Please pay close attention to the narrative and apply what you learn here to it. That is how you'll be able to see through the fog of propaganda and to discern clearly. Just like the words man and woman no longer hold the same meaning, the word democracy no longer means what it used to mean. Democracy is now post-op, and it goes by the name globalism. So don't get caught dead naming democracy. How about this? There is a war, some kind of war. Something is happening, and it's not good. But exactly what is happening, and who's doing what to who, and how it's being reported to the public, and what exactly does the word war mean in this case? I'm not buying anything I'm seeing from the media or hearing from the government. We've learned. A couple years now have taught us it's too dangerous to do that. It'll take years for them to earn any respect back if they decide to do it. So I'm not buying anything that I hear from the media, and that includes, for the greater part, Fox News. There is no truth to be found there, but there is truth, and we can find it. But it's not going to come from the media or the government. Not right now. So let's take a look at what we can find out about this situation from various other sources around the world. You can know what's happening. You can know the truth. You can discern this issue, or you can discern all you need to know about it for yourself. It can be done. And we're going to go about our work of doing just that. Now, Lord willing, this Thursday, live at 2 p.m., I'll state this again later in the show to remind those who show up later in the stream. This Thursday at 2 p.m., Eastern Time, New York time, we'll be talking to our brother Daniel from the Daniel Apologetics YouTube channel and ministry, also danielapologetics.com website, who is close to the action in Europe, and we'll show you right now. You can see right over here on the left side of the screen, there's Slovakia. Now, somewhere in here is where our brother Daniel lives, and you can see borders right with Ukraine. He's close to the action, and he'll be giving us his insider perspective of what he's experiencing from right there inside the region. So tune in with us at 2 p.m. Eastern, Thursday afternoon here for our live talk with our brother Daniel. Now, with the war brewing, apparently, in Eastern Europe right now, something else is about to happen over in that region. Does anybody remember 9/11? Does anybody remember all the war games? Does anybody remember how years ago things would happen? How all these drills suddenly went live? Can't say a lot of that about that here on this platform anymore. But the largest war game exercise event in the world is set to take place in a few weeks. Can you guess where? This will be the largest Norwegian-led exercise conducted in Norway since the 1980s, says spokesperson at the Norwegian Joint Operations. Operation Cold Response 2022, a NATO military exercise featuring over 35,000 troops from 23 of the 30 NATO member nations. Translation: one of the largest military drills since the 1980s will take place in the same region where Russia and Ukraine are battling right now. Well, let's just imagine for a second, if Russia decided to run exercises right off the coast where the U.S. was doing some operation in South America or whatever, how would they see that? How would you expect Russia to see this? The timing is too perfect, my friends. So let's go in and look at Ukraine. Let's learn a little bit about who we're talking about. We'll talk about superpower status in just a moment, but first of all, the religious makeup of Ukrainians. The majority of Ukrainians, 82% of them, are Orthodox. They're Christians, while 7% are atheists, only 7% atheists, and 11% found it difficult to choose between the two. As Pew Research notes, in many Central and Eastern European countries that once belonged to the Soviet Union, religion and national identity are closely entwined. This is true in the case of Ukraine, where roughly half of all Ukrainians, 51%, say it is at least somewhat important for someone to be Orthodox to be truly Ukrainian. Now that means Eastern Orthodox Christian. Religious affiliation also differs between residents of the two parts of the country. According to Pew Research, people living in Western Ukraine are more likely than those in the East to attend church on a weekly basis. So to say religion is very important in their lives and to believe in God is an understatement. The largest Protestant community in Ukraine is the Evangelical Baptist Union of Ukraine. Other Christian groups represented there are Pentecostals, Seventh-day Adventists, we might question some of these, but Seventh-day Adventists, Lutherans, Anglicans, Calvinists, Methodists, and Presbyterians. There are also non-Christian groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Mormons are there as well, in much smaller numbers. Now, as far as superpowers go, let's go full screen on this one for you. You can see here how it breaks down the top three. United States still at the top with a GDP of $21 trillion and a population of 330 million. With a GDP per capita, per person, of $65,000. Now China comes in with a GDP about 30% less than that, but with a population of 1.4 billion, which makes their GDP per capita per person to be about 10 grand per person. And then we have third, Russia. About $1.7 trillion in gross domestic product with a population of 144 million. About half of what the United States has. About 10% of what China has. With the GDP per capita per person about $11,500. So top three superpowers, at least economically anyway. What about Ukraine? Ukraine comes in at number 33. Just let you have that number and play with that if you like. Ukraine, number 33 in power rankings with a GDP of 154 billion per person. That works out to about 3,500. Population of 44 million. So we're talking about much, much smaller, but 154 billion. It's nothing to sneeze at. What's more important about Ukraine, seems like, as we're going to find out right now, is that it's a very strategic location. Before the dissolution of the USSR, Ukraine was the second most populous and economically important Soviet republic after Russia. So these two are been very close, sharing a border, of course. Post-Soviet politics, folks, this is not simple. None of this is as simple as the media is playing it to you. This chessboard is very complex with many different ideologies and moving parts. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has been stewing for many years. Now, of course, let's give the benefit of the doubt here. A superpower like the United States should, through due diligence alone, take an interest in the affairs of the nation states in this region. Primarily, the interest in Ukraine from the United States and other allies is strategic, not necessarily economic, but strategic. The aim since the mid-1990s has been to keep Russia, the most powerful of the Eastern European nations and the third world superpower, the aim has been to keep Russia from reestablishing control of East Central Europe and revamping the old Soviet Union. Right? And that's the narrative, right? That's the narrative. That's what you're going to hear from Biden tonight. It's going to sound like we're back in the Cold War. That fear has to be there. Is it warranted? This is a reasonable suspicion to have, but this possibility has been the source for much speculation and fear-mongering from U.S. political elites. The real fear, it seems like, if anything can be trusted, should be Russia and China forming an economic and military superpower. But of course, a healthy boogeyman is always good for business if you're a neocon or a new progressive Democrat who is knee-deep in military contracts. Money is always the first lead to follow, my friends, with power coming in a close second. Ukraine is clearly a piece to the Eastern European chessboard. Ukraine inherited from the Soviet Union the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. Now, it wasn't operational when they inherited it, but the U.S. and many of its allies pressured the Ukrainian officials to hand the nukes over to Russia, where they would be dismantled under the supervision of the allies, of course. Now, that all makes sense if everyone's being honest. Do we think they were? So what we're watching in our world today is really less a matter of governments facing off with one another. It's likely more a matter of something like ultra-high-level mob bosses squaring off on a global scale, with the people of the world as their fodder. And now they have whole militaries and even nuclear weapons at their disposal. This is an extremely dangerous point in history. I suggest that you don't fall for the idea that there is one group of shadowy characters sitting atop the pyramid in a smoky room, running the chessboard all by themselves as they wish. I think that would be a much safer scenario. It seems like the truth is more like there are many players, many powerful, wealthy people or groups vying for supremacy in a world field that's full of variables. They can't control it all. And greed is certainly a factor. Sometimes their interests do align and they're capable of grand moves like global shutdown of all the world's economies, or locking down of citizens worldwide for an end called the Great Reset. But sometimes, and I might say even more often, they don't get along so well, and their interests collide, and things get shaken up for a while. I'm not one who buys the idea that everything out there is scripted, and that this whole New World Order is going through the plans of the ones in charge. I think it's much worse than that. I think they're reckless. But I'm a Christian. And I know that God is the one restraining evil in the world. That the hearts of those who reject Him are unable to reason fully, causing them to fall prey to their own greed and their own desire for power. As a Christian with a proper and complete biblical foundation for knowing how the world works, we can take heart. We can be of good cheer right now because Christ has overcome the world. We're just watching it play out. So before we can analyze the narrative surrounding this event that we see happening now, that we're being told about, we need to take a short history lesson and learn how Russia, Ukraine, the United States, and all these players came to be in the position we see today. So that when you hear Biden talk tonight, or when you see the news reports, or watch anybody out here on YouTube or wherever talking about this, you'll have a background. You'll have a context for what's been going on for the past 50 years. We won't go back that far. But there is a definite globalist bent to the overall story. No doubt about that. But we aim to report on this in a balanced approach that's relevant for Christians and anyone else who wants to understand why this event is important and how we got here. Now, we're not going to make any prophecies here. Is this Gog and Magog? I don't know. Nobody knows. So be careful about the prophets that are out there telling you about what's going to be happening. If they weren't prophesying this 6 months ago or a year ago, well, don't be listening to those prophets. In 1991, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine declared its independence from Moscow. Let's go over here let's get back to the map. So that's 1991. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine declares its independence from Moscow. You can see Russia is over here on the right. I've got a small map of the region up here, so I'm not able to zoom out or anything on it. That's the size we get. And then in 1994, the U.S., United Kingdom, and Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, which guaranteed the security and territorial integrity of Ukraine, with a stipulation that Russia must destroy its nuclear stockpiles and cease all development of nuclear weapons. This agreement established the United States as the primary guarantor, financial supporter of Ukraine's national sovereignty. Established the United States as the primary guarantor of Ukraine's sovereignty. This means that the Ukraine would be beholden to the political elites of the United States and its global allies. Now, on one hand, it's understandable that the world's largest and traditionally freest superpower would be interested in this region and seek to bring peaceful solutions. But on the other hand, We absolutely cannot trust what we're hearing from the mainstream media or our own government these days. Can't do it. Joe Biden has been blatantly lying about both Russia and Ukraine in his recent press briefings. So we have good reason to be suspicious. So in the early 1990s, Ukraine quickly became one of the United States' top financial beneficiaries. Now, that's not always a bad thing. But in modern geopolitical terms, what that means is that Ukraine was at the service of the United States and that Ukrainian authorities did as gangsters do. Ukrainian authorities, that's what was left after the fall of the Soviet Union. Who rose up in that power vacuum? The worst of the worst. So those who became the authorities in Ukraine used their position to enrich themselves at the expense of the Ukrainian people. As it turned out, the United States was supporting yet another corrupt regime. Now, if you've ever read Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, you'll understand how it can happen that a country or a corporation or a very wealthy individual could gain control of a country's assets and essentially take it over. There's more than one way to own a country. Economic hitmen are the boots on the ground in the world's corporatocracy. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's wide open. It's the Wild West. These are the men that serve a vast network of corporations, banks, colluding governments, and they serve the rich and powerful people that are tied to them. This has become one of the most effective ways for governments, corporations, or extremely wealthy individuals to take control of the economies of whole countries. Think George Soros, for example, who's going to come up again in our report today. How do you think an actor became president of Ukraine? Stay tuned. You probably never heard about most of the names that control world affairs this way. They're not out in the public. We now live in a world where so much fiat wealth has been created that individuals can claim to own regions of the planet. Now, the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, or the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman is the one you should get. It exposes the fact that these men employ false economies, false promises, threats, bribes, extortion, debt, deception, coups, assassinations, and unbridled military power at their disposal around the world to achieve whatever their goals are. Wealth and power, ultimately. And this cannot be overstated, as it seems that now the economic hitmen may have graduated themselves to global power, and they actually sit in high positions of government today. This seems to be how business is done these days. It's all been legalized, privatized. Based on a battle reporting from during the War of 1812, cartoonist Walt Kelly wrote in a comic strip in 1971. He said, it perfectly summarizes mankind's tendency to create our own problems. He said, we have met the enemy, and he is us. And that's the truth. It's the heart of mankind. That's why evil runs wild in the world. Moving on now. In 2004, pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych, I had it a minute ago. Viktor Yanukovych is declared president, but allegations of vote rigging trigger protests. Viktor Yanukovych, now I'm back, was declared president, but very soon after that, corruption was uncovered, triggered protests. This was known as the Orange Revolution, which forced a rerun of the vote. Now, the Orange Revolution, George Soros seems to be one of the ones behind that as well. And what this allowed to happen was Yanukovych was gone, and pro-Western former Prime Minister Viktor Yushchenko was then elected president. In 2005, Yushchenko takes power with promises to lead Ukraine out of the Kremlin's orbit, out of Russia's orbit, toward NATO and the EU. Now that's what we're talking about here mostly. What United Nations, what the West wants to do is have NATO nations creep further and further west across your screen here, from left to right. So Ukraine, you've already got Poland and Romania, I believe Romania, but surely Poland. So Ukraine sits right there. They want that to be a NATO nation. In 2008, NATO promises Ukraine it will one day join the alliance, dangling the carrot. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych wins a presidential election. In 2012, we have some developments. The U.S. has been spreading democracy and protecting democracy in the Ukraine for nearly 30 years. There have been legitimate movements within the nation to overcome the corruption in its own government, but the failure of the United States to live up to its stated purpose in the nation has pushed Ukraine further toward authoritarianism. We might even suggest that this has been by design. It's a gold mine, right? When you can have a nation that's in disarray, it's a gold mine for these economic hitmen. On March 30th, 2012, the European Union, the EU, and Ukraine initiated an association agreement. However, the EU leaders later stated that the agreement would not be ratified unless Ukraine addressed concerns over stark deterioration of democracy and the rule of law, including imprisonment of political adversaries. Now, we're going to read from Vladimir Putin's statement on his justification for war in just a little while, and you're going to hear this as well. You're going to hear that, we'll just hang on for that. In 2013, Yanukovych government suspends trade and association talks with the EU and opts to revive economic ties with Moscow, so they do a U-turn. And this triggers months of mass rallies in Kiev. In mid-August of 2013, Russia started a trade war against Ukraine to prevent the country from signing a trade agreement with the European Union. So that's the big deal here. What they're going to tell you in the media is that Vladimir Putin is just doesn't want Ukraine to be a part of the EU or become a NATO nation, and that's true, and you'll find out why that is. Why isn't Russia a NATO nation? Does Vladimir Putin want to be a NATO nation? Well, the media is going to tell you that he hates NATO. What did he say about it? Stay tuned for that. You'll be very interested in what he had to say. A trade war with Russia and dealings with the International Monetary Fund pushed Ukraine further into turmoil. Now, it's not a secret, folks, that wherever the IMF and the World Bank has intervened, that place has most often ended up with its assets in the hands of foreigners and its people destitute with no economy. Now, about the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, or the World Bank. Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you learn about this. This is no secret. Nations receiving funds. Like you get a nation that's in dire straits. It can't feed its population. Forget about jobs. It can't even feed its people. This has happened quite a bit in African nations over the last 30 years. But nations that receive funds from the IMF are required to sign agreements in which they, among other things, agree to sell off their key assets like water, electric, gas, etc. And their natural resources, of course. Failure to comply with this could result in being cut off from all international borrowing. Now, in today's world debt economy, People, corporations, and countries cannot survive if they cannot borrow money in the international marketplace. A country can't make it. That's how the chessboard has been set up. In 2013, the IMF did something like this in Ukraine by increasing natural gas tariffs by 40%. Today, they're back at it. Today, as of a few days ago, February the 23rd, 2022, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, announced a mission to Ukraine for a $700 million loan as the conflict with Russia escalates to all-out war. Whenever there's a country in trouble, whenever it looks like a country can be scooped up at bargain basement prices, you'll see the IMF swoop in. So we'll get to that piece about the IMF's mission to Ukraine here in just a moment. Explain that a little deeper. In February of 2014, Parliament votes to remove Yanukovych after bloodshed in the protests. Within days, armed men seize Parliament in the Ukrainian region of Crimea and raise the Russian flag. Moscow would later annex the territory in 2014 of Crimea. In April of 2014, pro-Russian separatists in the eastern region of Donbass, this is the region we're talking about today, it'll be on the far right over here on your screen. Pro-Russian separatists in the region of Donbass declare independence. That's what we showed you right at the beginning of the show. That was in that area. Some 15,000 people have been killed since 2014 in fighting between the separatists and the Ukrainian army. That Russia didn't have anything to do with that. That was just inside. Now, this is according to the government in Kiev itself. July 2014. MH17, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur was traveling over conflict-hit Ukraine. That was July the 17th, 2014. When it disappeared from radar, a total of 283 passengers, including 80 children and 15 crew members, were on board. The plane crashed after being hit by, as the reports were, a Russian-made Buk missile over eastern Ukraine. Now, Russian-made, Ukraine separatist fired. A 15-month investigation by the Dutch Safety Board found in October 2015. The Dutch-led joint investigation concluded by May of 2018 that the missile system belonged to a Russian brigade. And Australia and the Netherlands announced both were holding Russia responsible for downing the aircraft. Now, when you know a little bit more about what's going on in the region, you can see how that might not be the case, right? You've got these separatists in the eastern part of the nation here in two sections, they call themselves two independent nations or states there. Anything happens in the region, Putin's going to take the hit for it. I'm not pro-Putin. I'm not here to do that. I'm going to talk to you objectively. I think Putin is a thug. 2017, an association agreement between Ukraine and the EU opens markets for free trade of goods and services and visa-free travel to the European Union for Ukrainians. In April of 2019, within a month of the end, we're going to get to the president now of Ukraine. Who was an actor. Within a month of the end of his hit show that was called Servant of the People, which was a satirical TV show about a down-on-his-luck high school teacher played by Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, who was the president of Ukraine. The show was about a high school teacher who was thrust into the Ukrainian presidency. That was the premise of the show. Then the comedian turned politician was elected Ukraine's president. Now, let's get this straight. A nation that shares a border with the world's third-ranked superpower, which happens to be the Allies' number one world enemy at the moment, a former Soviet Union fraught with corruption for decades, elects a comedian with no political experience to the highest office in the land. Now, you can buy that if you want to. Now, this is new information. I haven't really had a chance to vet it yet, but the report is this, that George Soros' involvement in Ukraine is well known. His name is linked to the Orange Revolution and regime changes in the country. Soros established the International Renaissance Foundation in Ukraine as part of his Open Society Foundations in April of 1990, right before the fall. Did he know something was going to happen? Soros acknowledged in an interview with CNN that he actively contributed to the overthrow of former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych in 2014. He said, quote, "I created a foundation in the Ukraine before it became independent from Russia. The foundation has functioned since then and has played an important role in current events." Now, so let's take a look here. That's what we have here. Now, I can't play this. Guardian will hit us for sure. But we'll scrub through it here. This is the current president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Can you separate fact from fiction? In Ukraine, it's getting a little complicated. In this clip, Vladimir Zelensky is playing the part of a Ukrainian president. And in this clip, in this one, he's running for president in real life. Zelensky is an actor and a comedian who plays a teacher who unexpectedly becomes president. Come on. After a clip of the character criticizing the government goes viral. So the premise of the show was that this high school teacher made some kind of a rant criticizing the government that went viral, and everyone loved him and just voted him, elected him president. So it just shows some clips from the show here and some language. How about that language? On New Year's Eve, Zelensky announced his presidential run, and he insists that it is not a joke. He says, first of all, people have grown tired of the old guard, so to say. Secondly, it's clear that I'm an open person. What does that mean? I'm an open person. I guess that means he's open for business. Come on in. I'll be your puppet. He says, and I don't just present myself like that. That is the way I live and lived before running for president. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't mean anything. He said, that's why he's a good politician. He's able to talk and not say a word. This is not a know-how or a hype. Some language barrier here. Anyway, so he goes on to win, So clearly, we've got something interesting happening here. What are we seeing happen here? I don't know. But this is not. Look, let me just break it down for you. Who's running Ukraine? Who's in charge? It's not that government. It's not that government. In November of 2020, Ukraine President Zelensky was hospitalized after contracting coronavirus. Just another point on the map there. This is also the last presidential election. Now, in the United States, in 2020 was the last presidential election year where Republicans and Democrats declared all-out war on one another. It was the year, if you remember, it's only been 2 years. If you remember, it was the year that the Trump impeachment hearings were held, which had to do with foreign aid to Ukraine. It had to do with a phone call to the Russian president at the time, but it had to do with whether or not Trump was going to allow the foreign aid to be reestablished. He had cut it off for a while. Seems like it was the right choice I'm not pro any side or another. We're just looking at this objectively. It was also the year of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden being accused of engaging in the corruption that exists in Ukraine for their personal benefit. Now, you can look up those stories if you like. We don't have time to go into that here. I don't really get into those stories too much here. So then, in January of 2021, Zelensky appeals to President Joe Biden to let Ukraine join NATO. That's last year. In February, his government freezes the assets of opposition leader Viktor Medvedchuk, the Kremlin's most prominent ally in Ukraine. So that's corruption. Freezing the assets of your political enemy, your political adversary. The spring of 2021, a year ago, Russia begins massing troops near Ukraine's borders in what it says are training exercises. October 2021, Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, published an article in Kommersant in which he argued that Ukraine was a vassal of the West, a servant of the West, and that therefore it was pointless for Russia to attempt to hold a dialogue with Ukrainian authorities because there's no point. They're not in charge. So this is just, sounds like he's just stating the obvious. November of 2021, satellite images show, just a few months ago, satellite images show ongoing buildup of Russian forces near Ukraine with estimates soon surpassing 100,000 troops deployed. American officials warn European allies that Russia could be considered a potential invasion of Ukraine. U.S. in November, U.S. deploys warships to the Black Sea. The Russian Defense Ministry described the deployment as a threat to regional security. Ukrainian Brigadier General Kirilo Budanov accused Russia of conspiring several protests against COVID-19 vaccination in Kiev to destabilize the country. Interesting stories, interesting timeline, right? More than 1,000 people blocked several streets in the center of the Ukrainian capital in whatever day this was in November. It says on Wednesday, protesting against COVID-19 vaccine certificates and state-imposed restrictions. The rally comes in response to restrictions that require teachers, government employees, and other workers to get fully vaccinated by November 8th or have their salary suspended. Last week, in November, Ukrainian authorities also started requiring proof of vaccination or negative test results for people boarding airplanes, trains, and long-distance buses. December 17th, 2021, Russia presents security demands, including that NATO should pull back troops and weapons from Eastern Europe and bar Ukraine from ever joining. January 2022, NATO puts forces on standby and reinforces Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets. Let's keep a picture of this guy up here for you. January 26th of 2022, Washington responds to Russia's security demands, repeating a commitment to NATO's open door policy while offering a pragmatic evaluation of Moscow's concerns. 2 days later, Russia said its demands were not addressed. Putin says this in his speech as well. They did nothing. They didn't respond. What you're going to find out is Vladimir Putin has been trying to settle this issue diplomatically for a while. You're not going to hear that on MSNBC. That doesn't fit the tight narrative. February of 2022. Now we're up to our day. Amid growing Western fears Russia could attack Ukraine, the United States says it will send 3,000 extra troops to NATO members Poland and Romania. Washington and allies say they will not send troops to Ukraine, but warn of severe economic sanctions if Putin takes military action, which has happened. Now, a CNN article, a headline, just to see where the narrative is going. A CNN headline from February 7th says, how Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky went from an actor playing the president on TV to a defiant wartime leader. They've been painting this guy as a hero all week. February the 21st, 2022. In a TV address, Putin says Ukraine is an integral part of Russian history and has a puppet regime managed by foreign powers. Is Putin lying? I don't think he's lying. I think he's diagnosed it. Putin orders what he called peacekeeping forces into 2 breakaway regions, which we covered at the beginning of the show today, in eastern Ukraine, after recognizing them as independent. Those 2 regions are the DPR and the LPR. the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. If you want to sound like a free nation, you should never call it the People's Republic. That's what communists do. February the 22nd, 2022, the U.S., Britain, and their allies sanction Russian parliament members' banks and other assets in response to Putin's troop order. Germany halts the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. That's one of the big issues here, is that running through Ukraine is some very important gas lines that run right there from east to west, from all across the country. And they were built, they were buried there during the time of the Soviet Union, so they're getting old anyway. February 23rd of this year, Russian-backed separatist leaders. Now, these are down here in the east again, separatist leaders, they call them Russian-backed. Maybe they are. Russian-backed separatist leaders ask Russia for help repelling aggression from the Ukrainian army. So what we have happening is the Ukrainian army coming down here into the east and battling these places who have separated from Ukraine. Now we go back to the story from Al Arabiya News. The International Monetary Fund starts a mission to Ukraine. That was released on February the 23rd of this year. The International Monetary Fund announced that it would start the process to loan money to Ukraine for the stated purpose of shoring up its economy. That's what they always say. IMF officials will start the process on Wednesday. The IMF and Ukraine signed a $5 billion loan program in 2020. Who do you think owns Ukraine? You're going to see what's happening here. If you stick with us, you're going to find out just exactly what's happening here in Ukraine. IMF and Ukraine signed a $5 billion loan program in 2020, extending it to June 2022 on the condition that the country meets the IMF's requirements in its banking system. Of course. Aside from IMF disbursements, Ukraine's government relies on 1.2 billion euros in aid from the European Union and a $1 billion loan guarantee from the United States and assistance from other Western partners, including Canada. So this is just, was Vladimir Putin lying when he said this is a vassal state of the West? Or was he just telling it like it is? Ukraine's dependence on foreign funds has increased since Russia began amassing troops at the country's borders in November. Likewise, the European market depends heavily on Russian gas that flows through Ukrainian pipelines. So Europe has a stake in this as well. They don't want the gas to quit flowing. So there's a lot at stake here. That's what we're saying. There's a lot at stake, and Ukraine seems to be a nation without a serious leader. Who's controlling Ukraine? Who's actually running Ukraine? It's not the guy. It's not Zelensky. Who's really in charge there? Well, let's look at some clips from Zelensky. Let's just take some peeks here. Let's take a look at this one. It's just a minute long.
Сегодня я инициировал телефонный разговор с президентом Российской Федерации. Результат – тишина. Хотя тишина должна быть на Донбассе. Поэтому сегодня я хочу обратиться ко всем гражданам России. Не как президент. Я обращаюсь к российским гражданам как гражданин Украины.
Hey, I think that's
С вами
true.
нас разделяет
I'm addressing you not as president, but as a citizen. I think he's telling the truth.
более 2000 километров общей границы. Вдоль нее сегодня стоят ваши войска, почти 200 тысяч солдат, тысячи боевых машин. Ваше руководство одобрило их шаг вперед на территорию другой страны. И этот шаг может стать началом большой войны на европейском континенте. Мы точно знаем, нам не нужна война, не холодная, не горячая, не гибридная. Но если на нас будут наступать войска, если у нас попытаются отнять нашу страну, нашу свободу, наши жизни, жизни наших детей, мы будем защищаться.
We will defend ourselves, he says. And how are they going to do that? By giving out guns to the citizens. Has that helped? Well, doesn't look like it has helped so far. Now this also, this as well. This was, let's see, this, well, let's see. Let me get you up to date here. February the 24th, Putin authorizes special military operations in Ukraine. Russian forces begin missile and artillery attacks, striking major Ukrainian cities, including Kiev. Kiev hasn't been attacked. Well, it doesn't look like it has anyway. And by the way, no cell towers have been damaged. No water treatment plants. No infrastructure. Not yet anyway. It could happen. It could have happened while I've been talking here. But so far it hasn't. It doesn't seem like Russia's really interested in causing any kind of major destruction. And we'll read Putin's statement in just a minute, and he'll tell you exactly what his purpose is. February 26, Western allies announced new sanctions, including restrictions on Russia's central bank and expelling key banks off the main global payment system. February 20, so there you go. They froze Putin's accounts that he doesn't have. He doesn't have any foreign accounts to speak of. Why would he? Why would he? He's not playing on their system. Well, one of the things they did, they cut him off from the SWIFT system, which is not a bank. It's just a way that that transactions are signaled somehow. Anyway, Putin doesn't have foreign accounts that any to speak of that could be frozen. You're not hurting him, in other way. It was symbolic. Freezing his accounts was a symbolic gesture to the world. Look at what we're doing. February 27th, Putin essentially threatens nuclear response by putting on alert the Russian wing of the military responsible for managing deployment and use of nuclear weapons. That's where we are. What in the world is going on? What is really going on? Who is running Ukraine? I submit to you, it cannot be the government that they're presenting us. It can't be this guy. It can't be him. President Zelensky recently asked for emergency admittance into the European Union, exactly what everyone in the West wants, while he uploads almost daily handmade vlogs from the street outside the Capitol building with his staff in T-shirts, making remarks that sound like they're taking on a schoolyard bully rather than being at war with a world superpower. I suggest to you, do not allow yourself to take a side in this war. When you hear this, whether you're watching somebody on YouTube or you're watching the media, don't let yourself take a side in this. Remain objective and stand on eternal truth. Because this one's getting stranger by the day. This video right here was shot on the 25th. 30 seconds. And it's strange. What in the world are they doing out on the street? Is this posturing?
Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут.
Good evening, everyone. The leader of the faction is here. The head of the presidential office is here. Prime Minister Shmyhal is here. Podolyak is here. The president is here. We are all here. Our soldiers are here. The citizens are here, and we are here. We defend our independence. That's how it'll go. Glory to our defenders, both male and female. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to our defenders, both male and female. Does that not sound distinctly Western? Right? Social justice has made its way to Ukraine. All right. Here's another interesting piece from a gentleman. This video from February the 26th. 3 days ago, something like that. I'm not here to tell you that nothing's happening there. I'm just showing you this. At least it's not happening in the city. Not yet. There you go. Clean that thing off. So that's the Maidvan Independence Square.
Hey guys, just a little update. Yeah, there's no comments on my videos, unfortunately. I don't know how to switch them on, but I just thought I'd let you know what's happening here in the centre of Kiev. Here we are on the Maidan, the very, very centre of Kiev. I'm on a crappy phone, so the image is probably not too good, but yeah. So far, I mean, everything's pretty peaceful in the centre. People are walking around. There's a lot of press, of course, but people going about their day, just going for a stroll down the Crescent like they do on a normal day. But yeah, apparently in the north of the city, in a place called Obolom, there are Russian tanks have been spotted and there's fighting. I've not seen it. I'm not in Obolom. I'm in the very centre. I've not heard anything, but hey, who knows? Occasionally you kind of hear like a plane go over the top, but it's cloudy, so I don't see them. But apart from that, it's a yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So, and this is where most of the Western media are doing their reports from, right? This is where middle of the city where nothing's happening, and they, of course, they've got their flak jackets on and their helmets, hundreds of miles away from anything. Anyway, and here's the man in the red hat one more time.
Going on, it's very clear that the Russian army,
February 26th,
did not want to hurt the people, and I can say this because they didn't bomb the cell phone towers. They didn't bomb the electrical generators, the power stations, the power grid. The people have running water, have internet, have telephony, have electricity. Life is going on as normal here in Kiev, right? Which is, like I said, the eye of the storm. And in Kharkov, the same thing. There's telephony, electricity, water. Everything seems to be going fine over there. Internet. The problem is that all the information that we're getting from the internet, nobody's really sure how accurate it is, where it's coming from. I see the same video and people saying it's fake video, then people saying that's real video, people saying it's from one location, people saying it's from another location. Nobody knows. I'm kind of rambling, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and the same thing can be said for the mainstream media. Nobody knows well, I guess we do know about them. What they're saying is not true. Now, and it can be shown to be not true. Biden's been lying for days on this thing. So we know now there are real people, precious image bearers of God, living there. And if what we're seeing is real, anyway, about what's happening in the East, and if what they're saying is true about a 40-mile-long convoy with supply lines and all that rolling in, this is a dangerous situation. But what I'm suggesting to you is this is not Putin versus Zelensky. It's not Russia versus Ukraine. This is the West. This is the Allies. This is the globalists versus Putin. It's the people who have control of Ukraine. As we've set up now, we've established a foundation for. And you don't have to take what I'm saying. That's just my commentary. That and $6 will get you half a latte at Starbucks. That's about what that's worth. But let's look at this. Now, this is really weird. Let's look at Ukraine's Twitter page. Why? Well, because, let's see if we can get, what I want to point out to you here is the posts on Ukraine's Twitter page are strange. It's showing all the people supporting Stand With Ukraine. Tell us what country you're supporting us from. Is that what you're going to be concerned about if you're fearing for your life? Also, another thing that Ukraine did was they tried to get Russia's Twitter feed, tried to get their account taken off of Twitter. Is that what you're going to do if you're in the middle of a war? Is that going to be your first move? And that was really one of the first moves. I like this. Corporations must stop financing Putin's war. Folks, that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. Corporations are financing everything that's going on in Ukraine. And going down here, we'll take a look. Here's, oh yeah, here you go. Here's some more of the pictures. Now, you tell me if this looks professional, like you would expect from an actual government. All right. You see What's the point here? Putin's isolated, but we are a family, I guess. And of course, he's going to show you that he's out in the street talking to the people. All right, does this look like a nation that's seriously a group of Ukrainians preparing Molotov cocktails to welcome Russian invaders? February the 28th, folks, this is 2 days ago. Is that... Where's the army? More things here. We'll get down here. There's another one here I'm looking for where they try to paint Putin as Hitler, and then Putin, he says that he points out that there's neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They're both calling each other Hitler. So anyway, it's just a strange Twitter page, if you ask me. This doesn't look like... This is a primary source, folks. This is Ukraine's Twitter page. This is, So we have to make no mistake. Ukrainians will prevail. We fought against the Russian and Soviet empires in the past, always. Freedom and democracy won the day. So we're going to compare these. There you go. There you go. That's the one I was looking for. Is this what you would actually expect from a country who's seriously, from at least the person who's running the Twitter feed, right? Is this person seriously trying to relay information to the Ukrainian people and to the world about what they need or about what's going on? This image of a doting Hitler on a little Putin. He says, this is not a meme, but it's our and your reality right now. This is lowbrow, man. This is Vladimir Zelensky's page, which is all in Ukrainian. Well, not all. We won't look too far there. We don't want to waste too much time here because I want to get to, we'll get to Putin's. We'll get to the president of Russia's Twitter feed too. We also have this from President Zelensky.
Всім доброго ранку, українці. Зараз в мережі дуже багато з'явилось фейкової інформації, що, немов я закликаю складати зброю нашу армію і йде евакуація. Значить так, я тут, ніяку зброю ми не складемо, будемо захищати нашу державу, тому що наша зброя – це наша правда. Наша правда в тому, що це наша...
Our weapons are our truth. Our truth is our land, our country, our children, and we defend it all. Our weapons are our truth? I don't want to be under the leadership of a man who says our weapons are our truth. Let's look at, now in contrast here, let's take a look at the President of Russia Twitter page. Information. Here we have a telephone conversation with President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Here we have some... Now, I'm asking you to just look at the optics here. Which one looks like a serious nation, and which one looks like a puppet regime? Of course, we're going to get propaganda out of both. No question about that. Propaganda is that's the way. So what you get here that's different is you get information, you get actual links to interviews, and I'm not saying it's all true by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just asking you to look at it and take it in and tell me, what do you think you're looking at here? What do you think's happening in Ukraine? Is this a real? Is this real? Is that, who's running Ukraine? Now, Putin's speech, his justification for war, from February the 21st of this year, I'm going to read it all. It's a long speech, but we're going to take the highlights out. Now, once again, primary source. Primary source. We're not taking anyone's word for it. We're going to read what he said. He says, first of all, I would like to emphasize once again that Ukraine is not just a neighboring country for us. It's an integral part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space. Now, let me just remind you, this is an entire speech where we can look at and we can consider it. We can analyze what he's saying and hold it up against what we've already learned and what we know to be true. What are we getting from President Zelensky out of Ukraine? Nothing. We're getting these short, simple statements. We're here. What is Zelensky's cause? But let's hear from Putin. He says, I would like to emphasize once again that Ukraine is not just a neighboring country for us, it's an integral part of our history. He says it's an integral part of our history, our culture, and our spiritual space. Ukraine has our friends, our relatives, not only colleagues, friends, and former work colleagues, but also our relatives and close family members. Since the oldest times, the inhabitants of the southwestern historical territories of ancient Russia have called themselves Russian and Orthodox Christians. It was the same in the 17th century when a part of these territories was reunited with the Russian state, and even after that. He says, in order to understand what is happening today, to explain the motives of Russian actions and the goals we have set, it is necessary to say at least a few words about the history of the issue. Now, Putin goes on here to give a pretty lengthy history lesson about the region, about the Soviet Union. He says modern Ukraine was created entirely by Russia, more precisely by Bolshevik communist Russia. This process began almost immediately after the 1917 revolution, and Lenin and his comrades in arms did it in a very crude way, with Russia itself, by secession, cutting off parts of its own historical territories. Of course, no one asked the millions of people who lived there for anything. So he's critical there. He's critical there of Lenin. Then, before and after the Great Patriotic War, Stalin already annexed some of the territories that had previously belonged to Poland, Romania, and Hungary and the USSR, and transformed them to Ukraine as a kind of compensation. Stalin gave Poland some of the ancestral German territories, and in 1954, for some reason, Putin says, Nikita Khrushchev took Crimea away from Russia and gave it to Ukraine. In this way, the territory of Soviet Ukraine was created. Okay? He says, in view of the historical destiny of Russia and its peoples, the Leninist principles of state building were not only a mistake, but far worse than a mistake. After the collapse of the USSR in 1991, this became absolutely obvious. He goes on to say the Bolshevik policy led to the emergence of Soviet Ukraine, which even today can rightly be called Vladimir Lenin Ukraine. He was its author and architect. This is fully confirmed by documents in the archives, including Lenin's strict directives for the Donbass area, which was literally squeezed into Ukraine. And now the quote-unquote grateful descendants have demolished Lenin monuments in Ukraine, and they call this decommunization. Now, the translator makes a note here and says, decommunization means the eradication of everything that reminds one of communism, similar to the denazification in Germany after World War II. Now, he says this. Putin goes on to say, if you want to decommunize, well, that's perfectly fine with us, but you should not stop halfway. We're ready to show you what real decommunization means for Ukraine. So just listening to what he has to say here. Now, after the fall of the USSR, the West, as we said earlier, came in, businessmen came in, and corporations, and took advantage of the area. And that's one of the things Putin describes here. And what it really was it was businessmen versus mafia, versus gangsters. Putin says here, instead of partnership, dependence prevailed, with the official bodies in Kiev sometimes considered almost a peccadillo. Suffice it to recall the constant extortion in the field of energy transit and the banal theft of gas. So he's explaining here how Ukraine was taken advantage of after the fall of the Soviet Union. The translator notes here, he says, details of the gas conflicts that he's mentioning here in the past do exist. There's evidence to support what he's claiming here. He says here, I should add that Kiev has tried to use dialogue with Russia as a pretext to negotiate with the West. In other words, to blackmail it into rapprochement with Moscow, and to gain advantages for itself on the grounds that otherwise Russian influence in Ukraine would increase. So he's saying there that what's been going on with the government, the puppet government that's there. They've been playing one against the other, playing the West against Russia and Russia against the West, being opportunists. Ukrainian governments have started to build their statehood on the denial of everything that unites us. They have tried to distort the consciousness and historical memory of millions of people, whole generations living in Ukraine. What he's describing here is that area of the world has a very specific a culture, people groups who know each other. And what's happened is, through this ownership, this corruption that's been fomented in Ukraine for many, many years, that influence has caused Ukraine to lose its identity. Not surprisingly, Putin says, Ukrainian society was confronted with the rise of extreme nationalism, which quickly took the form of aggressive Russophobia and neo-Nazism. Hence, the involvement of Ukrainian nationalists and neo-Nazis in terrorist gangs in the North Caucasus and the increasingly vocal territorial claims against Russia. He says foreign forces which have used an extensive network of non-governmental organizations and intelligence agencies to cultivate their clientele in Ukraine and bring their proxies to power have also played their part. Now, this would be the world governments. It's also important to understand, the world governments, non-governmental organizations that are funded, of course, by corporations, individuals, and governments. It's also important to understand that Ukraine has basically never had a stable tradition of genuine statehood. Since 1991, it has gone the way of mechanical copying of foreign models, detached from its history and Ukrainian reality. The state's political institutions have been constantly reshaped to serve rapidly rising clans with their own interests, which have nothing in common with the interests of the Ukrainian people. He's describing there that for decades now, it's been corrupt. What he's saying bears out with the history that we can find about the nation. He goes on to say, the purpose of the so-called pro-Western civilization decision of the Ukrainian oligarchs was and is not to create better conditions for the welfare of the people, but to subserviently serve Russia's geopolitical rivals in order to save billions of dollars stolen from Ukrainians and stashed by the oligarchs in Western bank accounts. Is he telling the truth? Some industrial financial groups that took over parties and politicians initially relied on nationalists and radicals. Others paid lip service to good relations with Russia and cultural and linguistic diversity and came to power with the votes of citizens who wholeheartedly supported such aspirations, including millions from the southeast of the country. But once in office, they immediately betrayed their constituents, abandoned their campaign promises, and implemented policies at the behest of radicals, sometimes persecuting their former allies, the corruption of putting your political adversaries in prison. Those civil society organizations that advocated bilingualism and cooperation with Russia, they took advantage of the fact that the people who supported them were usually law-abiding, moderate in their views, and accustomed to trusting the government. Now, he goes on here. I won't read it all, but the speech he's giving here is anti-globalism. Think what you want to about him, but his speech it's lucid, it's coherent, and it's anti-globalist. Make what you want to out of that. In 2014, the Maidan did not bring Ukraine closer to democracy and progress. The nationalists and the political forces supporting them finally led the situation to a dead end and pushed Ukraine into the abyss of civil war, which it has been in for 8 years now. And he says, 8 years after these events, the country is still divided. Ukraine is in an acute socioeconomic crisis. Is Vladimir Putin telling the truth? According to international organizations, in 2019, almost 6 million Ukrainians, he says, I emphasize about 15% of the total population, not the working age population, were forced to go abroad in search of work. As a rule, these are casual jobs. The following fact is also significant. Since 2020, more than 60,000 doctors and other health workers have left the country during the pandemic. Since 2014, water tariffs have increased by nearly a third. Electricity prices increased several times, and gas prices by 10 times. Many people simply don't have the money to pay utilities. They literally have to survive. Putin says, or he asks, what is happening? Why is all this happening? The answer is obvious. It is because the dowry, which dates not only from the Soviet era, the money that was left to sustain Ukraine, but also from the Russian Empire, has been squandered and embezzled. Tens and hundreds of thousands of jobs that provided people with stable income, including through close cooperation with Russia, and brought taxes into the state coffers, were lost to criminals. In industries such as machine building, instrument making, electronics, shipbuilding, and aircraft construction either lie idle or have been destroyed, whereas they used to be the pride, not only of Ukraine, but of the entire Soviet Union. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe, for one thing. They're seeds, a lot of seeds. They produce a lot of seeds and oils. In practice, it has come down to the fact that the collapse of the Ukrainian economy is accompanied by outright plundering of its citizens. Look at the pictures of the people in Ukraine outside the cities. Does it look like they're doing very well? While Ukraine itself is simply placed under foreign administration, not only on the instructions of Western capitals, but on the ground through a whole network of foreign consultants, non-governmental organizations, and other institutions that have spread themselves throughout Ukraine. This lines up with the historical timeline that we found. There's a book titled Ukraine, Everything You Need to Know. John Harris from Conversations That Matter suggested that book. I picked it up, and that's one of the sources that I use to get a lot of the information I'm sharing with you here today. I suggest you check it out. It's not really a biased perspective. Everyone's got a bias, of course, but this is a good... so anyway, what we find in that book, which is written from a Western perspective, matches up with what most of Putin's... Now, I'm sure there's some propaganda in here, but for the most part, what he's telling us is coherent. It matches. In addition, the U.S. Embassy directly controls the National Agency for Corruption Prevention, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and the Supreme Anti-Corruption Court. So the United States Embassy controls all of the corruption courts. All of this is done under the plausible pretext of making the fight against corruption more effective. Putin says, that's fine, but where are the results? Corruption is in full bloom and thriving better than ever. Wow. It's hard to argue against that. Are Ukrainians themselves aware of all these methods of their administration? Do they realize that their country is not simply under a political and economic protectorate, but has been reduced to the level of a colony with a puppet regime? Is he telling the truth? I'm asking you. The privatization of the state has led the government that calls itself the power of patriots to lose its national character and consistently pursue the complete de-sovereignization of the country. In March 2021, Putin says, Ukraine adopted a new military strategy. This document is almost exclusively dedicated to confrontation with Russia and is aimed at drawing foreign states into conflict with our country. Now, I ask you this. You've just seen The people in the streets making Molotov cocktails. They gave out handguns and rifles to citizens. They don't seem to have much of an army. Why in the world would they adopt a military strategy that was dedicated to confrontation with the world's third superpower? Is that Ukraine doing that? Or is that the Allies doing that? Making it look like it's Ukraine doing it. The strategy envisions building a kind of terrorist underground in Crimea and the Donbass. It also outlines the contours of the expected war, which according to today's strategists in Kiev should end, and he quotes from here, with the help of the international community on terms favorable to Ukraine, unquote. He says, we also know that there have already been statements that Ukraine will develop its own nuclear weapons. Now, what we want to find out here is, if we believe in what we're reading and we're putting these pieces together, we're putting the pieces in the board and a picture emerges, does Putin have any reason to be afraid of what's going on in Ukraine? Does he have any case to make for actually trying to defend his border against what's happening in Ukraine? We also know, Putin says, that there have already been statements that Ukraine will develop its own nuclear weapons, and this is not empty boasting. Ukraine has Soviet nuclear technology and the means to use such weapons. And of course, now we know that NATO is considering adding Ukraine, and the European Union is funneling money and weapons in there. Here's the point. If the West wanted peace in that region right now, they could have it. It's very easy. They could stop sending weapons into Ukraine. They could stop threatening. But we're going to hear more about that in a moment. Putin says if Ukraine comes into possession of weapons of mass destruction, the situation in the world, in Europe, especially for us, for Russia, will change dramatically. We cannot do anything but react to this real danger. There's billions of dollars since 2014 for this purpose, including weapons, equipment, and specialized training. In recent months, Western arms have flowed steadily into Ukraine, ostentatiously and in full view of the world. The Ukrainian armed forces and intelligence services are run by foreign advisors. We are all well aware. Unquote. He goes on here to say, the U.S. and NATO have begun shamelessly opening up Ukrainian territory as a theater for a potential war. They don't seem to care about the people on the ground there, but they're happy to blame Russia. The regular joint exercises are clearly anti-Russian. Last year alone, they involved more than 23,000 troops and more than 1,000 pieces of military equipment. A law has already been passed on allowing armed forces from other countries on the territory of Ukraine in 2022 to participate in multinational exercises. How would you feel here in the United States, for example, if, let's just think of, let's just say Cuba and North Korea and Cuba decided to start running military exercises somewhere in Florida or Texas? What would you think you need to do about that? How would you feel if North Korea started amassing weapons in Cuba, or how about on the border of Mexico? What would be the response of the United States if that happened? It's obvious that such events serve as a cover for the rapid buildup of the NATO military force in Ukraine, says Putin. He goes on here to say, I would like to point out that Article 17 of the Ukrainian Constitution does not allow for any of this to happen. He goes on to say here, I'll paraphrase, but that's just a rule that they can easily circumvent, he says. He says here, of course, every country has the right to choose its own security system and to enter into military alliances. And that would be all so if there was not a but. But international documents explicitly enshrine the principle of equal and indivisible security which, as you know, includes the obligation not to strengthen one's own security at the expense of the security of other states. And he refers to the documents there. In other words, the choice of security should not be a threat to other states, and Ukraine's ascension to NATO is a direct threat to Russia's security. Now you might say, well, okay. Putin hates NATO, right? That's what the media is telling you, right? Putin is scared. He hates NATO. Well, listen to this. Putin says, quote, "I'm going to say something now that I've never said publicly before. I'm going to say this for the first time. In 2000, the year 2000, when outgoing U.S. President Bill Clinton visited Moscow, I asked him, what would America think about admitting Russia into NATO?" Unquote. Has any news outlet anywhere told you that Putin was interested in being a member nation in NATO? Do you realize that if they really wanted peace in that area right now, that's all they would have to do? That's all you would have to do. Stop building up weapons in Ukraine and start talks with Putin about admitting Ukraine and Russia into NATO, for that matter. Anyway, he continues here, quote, "I won't divulge all the details of that conversation, but the response to my question looked outwardly, shall we say, very guarded, and how the Americans actually reacted to that possibility can be seen in their practical steps toward our country." In other words, he says, of course, they don't want this. In other words here, as we see what statecraft looks like today in the world, maintain a foil, an opponent. That's foreign policy, to create enemies, to maintain certain enemies. Not peace. Peace is not the way, because peace is not profitable to a war hawk. And we're surrounded by war hawks. He says there is, quote, "there is only one answer. It's not because of all our political regime or anything else. They simply do not need such a big independent country as Russia, NATO. That is the answer to all questions. It is the source of traditional American policy toward Russia, hence the attitude toward all our security proposals." Putin has made the effort. They've turned him down. They don't want him to be in NATO, because then they don't have the world's third superpower as an enemy in the region, and that's convenient to have. Today, quote, "Today it is enough to look at the map to see how the Western countries have kept their promise not to expand NATO to the east. They have simply deceived us. We have seen 5 waves of NATO expansion, one after another. In 1999, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary were admitted to the alliance. In 2004, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. They're surrounded by NATO nations except Ukraine. Ukraine is the only one around them on their border that's not on their western border that's not admitted into NATO yet. 2009, Albania and Croatia. 2017, Montenegro and Northern Macedonia. As a result, the alliance has come right up against Russia's borders with its military infrastructure. What would you do if you live in Canada and all of a sudden the United States starts amassing weapons and tanks and troops at the Canadian border? What would the UK do? What would happen? He says this has a very negative impact on the whole system of international relations, leading to the loss of mutual trust. So I ask you, as you listen to the mainstream news narrative right now, do you really think that anyone is interested in peace? They're not interested in peace. They want war. And in about an hour or about 40 minutes from now, Joe Biden's going to call for just that. You're going to see that happen. Putin says this, quote, "NATO documents officially declare our country directly as the main threat to Euro-Atlantic security, and Ukraine will serve as the springboard for such a blow." He says, and of course, we are also expected to continue to behave according to the well-known saying, "The dog barks, but the caravan moves on." I say right away that we have not agreed to that and never will. At the same time, now listen to this point out of Vladimir Putin's mouth that you don't hear anywhere in the news. Putin says this, "At the same time, Russia has always been and still is in favor of solving the most complex problems by political and diplomatic means at the negotiating table. Where's the media? Where's the media holding our government accountable? There's a way to have peace in that region right now. Folks, we've met the enemy, and it's us. Now, as an extra piece here, I'll just share this. Putin has made, it's interesting because the way he sees the West is pretty much the way we see the West. Immoral, fallen, corrupt. Putin says here, the goal is the same, to suppress Russia's development, and they will do it as they have done before, even without any formal pretext, because we will never compromise our sovereignty, our national interests, and our values. What does he mean by our values? Elsewhere in other statements Putin has made, he is very much against this social justice movement, this LGBTQ plus what movement. Putin sees it as immoral. He has described it as unnatural. Is he wrong? Is he wrong? Is he right about the West? He says, I want to say clearly that in the current situation, when our proposals for an equal dialogue on fundamental issues have gone virtually unanswered by the United States and NATO, when the scale of threats to our country is increasing significantly, Russia has every right to take countermeasures to ensure its own security. That is exactly what we're going to do. What would you do? Lastly, he says, in this context, I believe it is necessary to take a long overdue decision to recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic without delay, the two we mentioned at the top of the show. So there you go. There's Vladimir Putin's comments about this. And if anyone tells you that, well, we tried to, to talk to Putin and he just wouldn't do it, that's just not true. We didn't hear a peep out of Russia for 4 years when Trump was in office. And once again, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not on any side, but that's the truth. That's the truth. Is that because Trump is a fascist? I don't think so. So on the other side of this, we have Putin. Or on one side, we have Putin. On the other side, we have this gentleman, right? We're being told lies. We're being told lies about Ukraine. We're being told lies about what's going on in there. So what we're seeing here is the redefining of the word democracy, all right? The World Economic Forum's Fourth Industrial Revolution has many names. The Great Reset, the Great Transition. They could call it a pandemic if they like. They could call it the New World Order. But in the end, it will be technocracy that controls what is left of the current world, system. Global totalitarianism. For the common good, of course. After all the racism, disease, and climate change, surely you've learned your lesson that Big Brother is our savior, right? That Klaus Schwab has all the answers. It's widely accepted that IRBO, the International Rules-Based Order, is undergoing a disruptive change. That transformation is often reported as an eastward shift in the balance of power. That's what we're talking about. NATO nations being pushed further east between nation states. But is it really about peace, or is it about perpetual war? As we just read, they could have peace in the region today. They don't want it. So what is Putin left to do? You see, this is what our politicians, our leaders in the United States and the West, if we'll call them that, they're either ignorant or they know exactly what they're doing. Because what they're doing is they're pushing Putin into the arms of China, into the arms of Xi Jinping. And that's an alliance that the people of the world, I don't think, want to see. February 4th, 2022 may very well be remembered in history textbooks as an important date in the shift of global politics. That day was not only the inauguration of the Olympic Winter Games in Beijing, it also saw a historic meeting between the presidents of China and Russia. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin signed a series of important economic and political agreements deepening the integration of the two Eurasian superpowers. Among this was a major 30-year deal in which Russia will supply gas to China via a new pipeline, which both sides of the energy transfers managed by state-owned companies. And in a sign of their mutual efforts to challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar, they decided to settle the sales in euros. One way to speed along the fall of the United States of America is to remove the dollar as the reserve currency, or the currency that the rest of the world uses to pay for commodities like oil. And this is one of the things that we see happening here. Following the Xi-Putin reunion, the Chinese and Russian governments released a lengthy joint statement declaring a new era of multipolarity, proposing a new international political model that will leave behind the unipolar hegemonic order dominated by Washington, D.C. So what's being formed before our eyes is a Eurasian economic and technological power bloc. In other words, David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission is certainly beaming today. Look at what they've accomplished. If only David Rockefeller himself had lived to see it. Maybe they'll thaw him out so he can see his design in action. But what's now being framed as the multipolar order is in reality the multi-stakeholder order. Now, we can look at this two ways. Either this is the plan to get Russia and China together so we can have one major foil in the world, because that's how governance has been done for a long time now. Or it's as I pointed out earlier in the show, these world leaders, their reason is darkened. They're given to their greed and pride, and sometimes they fight with one another. So I'm not going to be one who's going to say that they're so brilliant and so tactical and so smart that they can actually take over the world and rule it from one place. Maybe at some point, but not yet. It looks like to me that if they wanted to have peace right now, they could. But it looks like it's what they want to do is push Putin into this direction. An alliance between Russia and China would probably serve for lots of wars, which means profits for military contract holders. It means death and destruction for image bearers of God. It means big trouble. It doesn't have to be. But what we want to point out to you today is that the word democracy is being thrown around out there as if these people really want democracy, as if they really believe in democracy or any kind of freedom. While they claim to be protecting freedom in Ukraine, they destroy it here in the United States or in Canada. While they claim to be concerned about the borders of Ukraine, they kick open the doors and let anyone bring anything they want through the southern border of the United States. Their narrative is incoherent. It can't continue this way. Some of the headlines that are going on right now, they're out there about this right now. In Russia, Nazi is the harshest insult for any foe, and now Ukraine. We saw in the Twitter feed a little bit ago, it says Russian President Vladimir Putin has deployed emotive epithets against Volodymyr Zelensky and his government in an effort to justify invading. Putin says he will denazify Ukraine, Now, what's interesting is you can find, if you do some research, you can find this, where the United States years ago actually supported some neo-Nazi separatists in Ukraine. So this thing's a little more complicated than media is presenting it. People magazine headline, it's just total fiction how Putin is using Nazi propaganda to defend the invasion of Ukraine. Folks, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's not total fiction. That we can show. CNN headline, Putin's lie to justify invasion draws out. And you've just heard me read his case for this action, this military action that he's taking right now. You've heard his case. And you've heard what the Ukrainian president has to say. What do you think's going on? Not only that, we've got other parts of the narrative, the nuclear narrative. Putin puts nuclear forces on high alert, escalating tensions. This part right here, too, which is a little interesting, China and Russia asked the United Nations to check biological warfare strength of the United States and its allies. Why might they say that? This is because it's come to our attention that in Ukraine, that there are biolabs, like was in Wuhan, the biolab where some people say the virus is created. I don't know about that. I don't know. But a biolab like the one in Wuhan, that there are several of those in Ukraine. What are they doing there? The article states that these are United States-backed, funded biolabs that are in Ukraine. Now, you tell me what you think you might do if all of a sudden North Korea was building up, or China was building biolabs in Cuba. Would the United States not take an interest in that? Maybe want to get rid of them? So there's the nuclear, there's the bioweapon narrative, the biolabs narrative. What's going on? John Rappaport wrote an article on his blog this week about how he has covered there years ago that there are pesticide storage dumps all over Ukraine, full of arsenic, where if they happen to get hit by a shell, it would kill many people. Just the arsenic that would be released into the atmosphere would end up killing a lot of people as well. So it's a little bit more complicated than the media is portraying. Now, there's also this. Let me find out who it is. Who's supporting who here in this? Which countries are supporting which? I think it's probably pretty easy to find that out, isn't it? Cuba, a close ally of Russia, has sharply criticized the United States for imposing the progressive expansion of NATO towards the Russian Federation. Russia will get the strongest support from China. China has already announced that NATO is doing arbitrariness, that's a funny word, arbitrariness in Ukraine. Folks, it's sad when you wake up and realize that you're sleeping with the enemy. Ever since the stance of Western countries has turned against China, Russia has always been supporting China. In fact, both Russia and China have multidimensional partnership with cooperation ranging from trade to military space. Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Belarus, once part of the Soviet Union, will support Russia due to Collective Security Treaty Organization agreement. North Korea would wholeheartedly support Russia if a full-scale war was to take place. In fact, China and Russia recently blocked the U.S. bid to impose sanctions on North Korea at the United Nations. Who will support Ukraine? The European countries of NATO, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the UK, the United States fully support Ukraine. It's because they have financial interest there, of course. It's because they're running Ukraine. Clearly, Zelensky's not doing it. The United States and Britain have emerged as the biggest supporters of Ukraine. Germany and France have recently tried to diffuse the controversy by making a speedy visit to Moscow. But after Russian President Vladimir Putin recognized 2 breakaway Ukrainian regions as independent states and ordered Russian troops to deploy, Germany halted approval of the key Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and other Western nations issued sanctions. Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada are all supporting Ukraine. and have imposed sanctions on Russia after it recognized Ukraine's two provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk as independent countries. Who's neutral? India is one of the most geopolitically important countries in Asia and is typically known for its neutrality and being a non-aligned state despite having strong ties with Russia and the West. India has a very close relationship with both Russia and the United States. Nearly 40% of India's GDP comes from foreign trade. And on down the line here. So India, for the moment, seems to be neutral, but that could change quickly depending on sanctions. So that's an idea of who is supporting who. How is the global chessboard being set up? Here we've got Schwab, who's going to tell you, and I'll give you a short list of people that are involved in this statecraft. Here you go. This formation of a world order.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and
That's loud.
know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina.
So the point here is that the World Economic Forum, since the 80s at least, has been infiltrating governments and cabinets with their people, okay? I have a list that I'll share with you here. It's just a short list, just to give you an idea. What does this have to do? Russia and Ukraine. These are the people that you would expect to be on the side of globalism. Now, he mentioned Vladimir Putin there as one of the World Economic Forum's young global leaders at one point. Well, I don't know. Could he change his mind? Is it all scripted? Or do people change their minds? I'll leave it up to you. World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders, an overview of some of these leaders and participants currently in politics and media and technology and social media. This list is not even close to being exhaustive. Just gives you an idea. In the United States, Jeffrey Zients, the White House coronavirus response coordinator since 2021, former World Economic Forum young global leader. Gavin Newsom, governor of California. Pete Buttigieg, secretary of transportation. Chelsea Clinton. Nikki Haley, former ambassador to the UN. Samantha Power, former ambassador to the UN and the USAID administrator. Jonathan Soros, son of George Soros. Alicia Garza, founder of Black Lives Matter, was a young global leader from the World Economic Forum. Stephanie Bancel, CEO of Moderna, vaccine producer. How about in the European Union? These groups that are banding together right now to come against Russia, when we've heard plainly peace could be had. These are the people who apparently don't want peace. They'd rather keep this boogeyman foil alive as long as possible. European Union, Jose Manuel Barroso, EU Commission President from 2004 to 2014. Jean-Claude Juncker, EU Commission President from 2014 to 2019. So the European Union, certainly World Economic Forum connected. Emmanuel Macron, French President. Nicolas Sarkozy, former French President. Sebastian Kurz, Austrian Chancellor. Matteo Renzi, former Italian Prime Minister. On down. I mean, just all over Europe. It's the European Union, right? But these, just one after another from all the major players in Europe, they're leaders. were World Economic Forum young global leaders. In Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some names there. Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, was a World Economic Forum young global leader. Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister. Gordon Brown, former British Prime Minister. Dawood Azami, BBC World Service Economist, so there's your media. Lynn Forster de Rothschild, co-owner of The Economist. Nathan Rothschild, co-owner, or son of Lord Rothschild, and it is also Nathan Rothschild, if he still is or not, but has been for a long time, the head of the International Monetary Fund, which we've talked about here tonight. Greg Hunt, Austrian Health Minister. Isn't it interesting that you find a lot of the people involved with the response to the pandemic were young global leaders from the World Economic Forum. Chrystia Freeland, Canadian Deputy Prime Minister, former Managing Director of Reuters, so media and government come together. And of course, Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister. He is a World Economic Forum participant, but not a confirmed young global leader from the forum. Germany, Angela Merkel, and their former health ministers, three of their former health ministers were young global leaders. Late Foreign Minister and Vice Chancellor Guido Westerwelle, Christian Wulff, former German president. In media, CNN medical analyst Liana Wen, CNN chief medical correspondent Sanjay Gupta, World Economic Forum young global leader. From the New York Times, Andrew Ross Sorkin and Thomas Friedman. George Stephanopoulos from ABC News. And you thought, okay, surely Fox News, surely the Fox Corporation wouldn't be. No, of course. Lachlan Murdoch, CEO of Fox Corporation, also World Economic Forum young global leader in the past. Technology and social media, Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft. Steve Ballmer, former Microsoft CEO. Jeff Bezos, Amazon founder. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the Google co-founders. Eric Schmidt, former Google CEO. Jimmy Wales, the Wikipedia co-founder. Peter Thiel, PayPal co-founder, but apparently not Elon Musk, was not a young global leader from the World Economic Forum. Interesting. I don't know why. Or maybe he was and we don't know about it. But Pierre Omidyar, eBay co-founder, and Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook founder and CEO. World Economic Forum, young global leader. So let's remind you now, as we get to the end of the show, let me show you that on Thursday at 2 p.m., Lord willing, okay, let's pray for our brother Daniel, who is, let's show you where he is here. We'll get the map back up here. Okay, here's the map. We'll show you where our brother Daniel from the Daniel Apologetics YouTube channel. You see over here on the far left of your screen, my mouse isn't showing up there. You can see the little green box there. That's Slovakia. Daniel is somewhere there. He'll let us know exactly where, not exactly where. He'll let us know generally where he is in the region. But, and this is Ukraine, and Russia is over here. Daniel is going to give us a report from his perspective, and we look forward to hearing from Daniel on that because, you know, we're trying to find out what's real and what's not real. And Daniel's going to be able to help us out with that. So Thursday, 2 p.m., right here on the Armor of Truth YouTube channel, insider information with Daniel from Daniel Apologetics. Please join us for that. Also, go over to Daniel's YouTube channel, Daniel Apologetics, and go to his website. My wife, Summer, will be happy to share that link with you in the live chat right now. And please join us, 2 p.m. New York time on Thursday for a live talk with Daniel. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Please go over and support his ministry at danielapologetics.com. And this is what it looks like. You can support him on Patreon and whatever other way he has. I'm a Daniel Apologetics supporter on Patreon, so I encourage you to do it as well. Okay, as we finish it up here today, I have Armor of Truth is a full-time mission. We're a ministry. If you'd like to support us, you certainly can. We'd appreciate that. Go to armoroftruth.net, go to the donate tab. It looks like this. If you want to support us, this is one way that you can do that. You can also, there are links in the description to this video on how to support us as well. We need your support to continue to do the ministry work that we do. We help people find churches. If you'd like to find a church in your area, you can email us at hello@armoroftruth.net. Tell us where you live. Give us a landmark. You don't have to tell us your address, but a landmark that's kind of close to you so we can find a church in your area. Hello@armoroftruth.net. If you've requested one of those recently, just be patient. It takes a few weeks to get those turned around because it takes hours. It takes hours to do those. It takes a long time to do one of those. We love doing them. We're happy to do it. If you'd like a free Bible and a starter pack of tracts, email us at hello@armoroftruth.net. And in the subject line, say, I would like a free Bible. Give us your mailing address, and we will send that out to you. And if you'd like to send us snail mail, tell us that you like what we're doing or you don't like what we're doing. Or if you want to send in support, a check or a money order, you can make it payable to Armor of Truth and send it into Armor of Truth, P.O. Box 729, Hudson, North Carolina, 28638. Okay, now, here we have, there's an article from the ERLC. This is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, I guess an arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And they have an article here called 4 Reasons Why Christians Should Care About What's Happening in Ukraine. There's a problem here. What we're going to call Christian elites, there is a specific view that Christian elites are taking, and these are the same Christian elites that have allowed churches to be overrun with social justice, filtering the gospel through the lens of the oppressed, right? Allowing homosexuality to go unchallenged as a sin, just like anything else, because it's socially unacceptable to do that these days. So the ERLC has been one of those groups that has lost its way, as it seems the Southern Baptist Convention has as well. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been spoken about openly for a long time. So this article, 4 Reasons Why Christians should care about what's happening in Ukraine, you can check out the article if you like. We've been going for a while. I don't want to take up too much of your time with this article. What I want to look at is the prayer at the bottom. There's just a lot of obvious stuff in this article. It's a little fluffy, to be honest. It says Ukraine is a sovereign country and a U.S. ally. I've read this article. You don't find anything in this article like the history of Ukraine that we shared with you here tonight. You don't get any of Vladimir Putin's actual reasons. You get none of that. And for some reason, they're talking about cyber attacks here. Could trigger Article 5 of NATO. I don't know what that's got to do with anything here, but... And they say it could cause a refugee crisis. It's obvious. They talk a little bit about the Ukrainian church. We've already discussed that at the beginning. But here at the bottom, there's a call to prayer. It says, ultimately, Christians should care about this because millions of image bearers live in Ukraine. Agreed. We should urgently cry out. What about Russia? What about Slovakia? What about Poland and Belarus? What about the surrounding nations? About the rest of the people in the region? No. What you hear in these articles, and there's another article from the Gospel Coalition that I looked at too, you're getting a very political spin on this report. Even the prayer. Now, far be it from me to criticize someone's prayer, but I want to point this out to you. It says, we listed a few ways you can pray specifically below, and this guide from Send Relief has additional suggestions. Okay. They say, pray that Christians and missionaries in Ukraine would hope in the Lord and that many would come to saving faith in Christ through their witness. Certainly. Pray for the safety of citizens in Ukraine as war begins, that their lives would be honored and protected. Pray that those fleeing the country of Ukraine and those who will be unable to return home will find a Christ-like welcome and a home in a new nation. Certainly. Pray for President Biden and global leaders as they navigate geopolitical tensions. Certainly, we're to pray for our leaders, our leaders of our nation, the leaders of the world. Pray that Vladimir Putin, not pray for, but pray that Vladimir Putin's heart would be changed and that he would withdraw from Ukraine and not pursue additional aggression. So, what about God's sovereignty? What about praying that God's will would be done here? It says, in the midst of the darkness, may it be the light of Christ that brings hope and help through his people, his word, and his mercy shown to a war-torn region. Amen to that. However, where is the respect for the Russian people? Where is the respect for brothers and sisters in Slovakia or surrounding nations? Sadly, now nothing they're saying here is wrong. I'm just saying this is politically motivated. They're flying their flag, for the current administration. A Christian's heart should be for all the people involved, including Vladimir Putin, his cabinet, his military, his leaders, as well as Vladimir Zelensky, the actor president. We're no respecter of persons. Jesus is no respecter of persons. We shouldn't be either. We should pray equally for all of these involved. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Also, the Gospel Coalition as well had a similar prayer. It said, how can Christians pray for Ukraine? They say, pray that Putin will relent of his dictatorial desire to control Ukraine. Now, once again, what if Vladimir Putin actually has a case? What if he thinks he's going in there to save lives? Is that at all possible? No, we're getting a political Christianity here. Pray that Putin will relent of his dictatorial desire to control Ukraine and that both the Ukrainian and Russian people will be able to live in peace. There you go. That's a good one. Amen to that. Pray also for our brothers and sisters in Christ who live in Ukraine and are anxious about the rumors of wars. Read a perspective here. It says, pray that God will use this crisis to bring about good from what was meant for evil. And amen to that piece. However, the Gospel Coalition and the ERLC have blown their cover. They've shown their allegiance is to man rather than God, especially in their promotion of social justice, wokeness. But it's not normally my area to comment on. I just wanted to bring that piece up because I saw John Harris mention this the other day, and I thought that was a good point. I wanted to share my thoughts on it. John Harris is at Conversations That Matter YouTube channel. Go there, check out his channel. You'll be blessed. That is Conversations That Matter on the YouTube channel, and you can find his website there from his About section. I don't remember the name. Worldview Conversation. That's his website, I think. Worldviewconversations.com. Very helpful. And let me just say thank you for joining us and being with us today. Lord willing, we'll be back here Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time with our brother Daniel from Daniel Apologetics, live here to tell us what's happening right there in the region, at least from his perspective. And he's got some stories to tell. He's got some things that are happening that are going to surprise you. So pray for our brothers and sisters all over the region. The Russians, the Ukrainians, the separatists, the neo-Nazis. Pray for all of them, right? God is restraining evil in the world today. And it is the gospel that is the power to change hearts. So let's pray that the gospel could be carried and preached throughout that region, because that's the only hope. That's the only hope for the hearts of those who are there. So for the entire region, let's pray that God would restrain this evil more and more. Let's pray that his judgment would relent on us now, because it's clear. Our nation, the United States of America, Canada, for example, we're under judgment. Right? This is what judgment looks like, is when people can't even decide whether they're male or female. They can't decide what to do with themselves. This is what judgment looks like, when people's minds, they can't reason properly. Let's pray that God's judgment would relent, or that Christ would return today. Either way, we'll keep carrying the gospel, because that is the power. John 16:33, you're going to have trouble. It's going to be tough in this world, but be of good cheer. Take heart. Jesus Christ has overcome the world. God came into the world as a man. Jesus of Nazareth lived a life, taught his ministry for 3.5 years, gave his life as the perfect sacrifice. God with us in the flesh. 100% man, 100% God. Gave his life willingly on the cross. No one took it from him. He gave it, and then he took it back up again in victory over sin and death, so that our nature as fallen sinners could be redeemed into a right relationship with God. So if you're hearing this message and God is pulling on your heart, just understand that's what's happening. The gospel is the power. The gospel will change your heart. It will change the hearts of others. So share it, my friends. Share it widely, however you can. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you here again next time.
Armor of Truth, live. Faith is resistance.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth. against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.